continuing our study of 2 Kings. As I was preparing this week, a thought occurred to me, probably has occurred to you too, that as we read through these Old Testament accounts, these Old Testament stories, which in my view, the section that we're in right now is really extremely dense in foreshadowing Christ and his message and his ministry. But as I was reading this, I couldn't help but thinking that as I read this, I am really being prepared to study and understand the New Testament. And I realized that how unprepared and how ill-equipped I am to understand, much less to teach the New Testament until I fully understand the Old Testament. You know, and I think about the way God taught the nation of Israel. Nation of Israel, of course, they had the various writings almost from the beginning of time, but Moses put together the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, roughly when? How many years before Christ? About 1,400 years before Christ, right? The
captivity was the thousands.
Yeah, the Egyptian captivity was about 1876 to 1446 BC. The children of Israel were in the wilderness from roughly 1446 to 1406. That was their period. So that was the period of time in which Moses put together the first 5 books of the Bible. So, all right, that was something that was available. That was Holy Scripture. That was written down to the children of Israel, starting again 1450 BC plus or minus. So before Christ, the children of Israel had the written word of God for about 1,400 years. The writings continued, the prophets continued to write and publish materials until the last book of the Old Testament was published about when? How many years before Christ? About 400 BC.
Oh, and I thought you said New Testament, I'm sorry.
No, the Old Testament, I may have said New Testament. The Old Testament prophets, the last prophet did his writing roughly 400 BC, and then everything went quiet for about 400 years. And you wonder, why did God wait 400 years? What was he doing? Did God love his people any less during that 400-year period of time? I don't think so. But one of the things that occurred to me is he gave them 400 years to study his word and to really understand what it was about. And I believe that people were not prepared to hear the gospel of Christ. They were not ready for the coming of Christ until they had the opportunity to dwell on and read and study and understand and attempt to live the principles that are set forth in the Old Testament. And so that reinforced for me the need for us to really understand and really try to dig out every little bit of meaning that it possibly has been preserved for us in these Old Testament writings, because it's all important. It's all important. It prepares us to study and to understand and live the New Testament principles of the gospel. Somebody started to say something.
So how long were they in slavery in Egypt? 400 years?
About 400 years, yeah.
So there was a brief period of time, 400 years. So there was like, my thought was that 400 years that they were ready for Moses to come, and then 400 years for Jesus to come.
That's interesting. I never made that connection before, but that's about right. God left them there for 400 years. I mean, they were a nation of about how many people when they went into Egypt?
70.
About 70 people they went into Egypt. And when they left Egypt, how many were there?
Millions.
Probably 2 or 3 million. And so, yeah, they were there. God was teaching them. He was preparing them. He was building them into a nation. He had, for 400 years. Interesting point there. Yeah, then he had them in slavery for 40 years, and then taught them, and then gave them another 400 years to digest what he taught them, and then Christ comes.
Well, I heard that was a dark time, that God went dark, and that possibly he turned away from them, like when they were in exile in Egypt. He heard them, but for a long time he did not do anything. So
maybe so, but I think what he said before he left the room, he said, "Do your homework." So they had something to study, and they were. I think God wanted them to study that just the same way He wants us to study and understand what He gave us in the Old Testament.
one more question: When was Revelation written?
Revelation was written about
7 years after Christ.
What's that?
67 years.
Probably so, about 90 AD. Yeah, so probably 60 or 70 years after Christ.
You think, just coming to my pea brain, that this Elijah staff that he had, do you think that was Moses he had found somewhere? Because it, you know, it still had the properties.
That's an interesting thought, you know, about those Old Testament relics.
That, you know,
It's
they
interesting
all
because-
used it to hit the Jordan River and,
Yeah.
We used his
Yeah.
mantle.
Yeah, he used his mantle to hit it, but yeah. But you know, at this point in time, that, you know, you talk about what relics were around, people have had a tendency to collect relics and to be focused on relics and to worship them for a long period of time. You know, you go over to the churches of Europe, one of the things I always enjoyed doing is going to the big churches and seeing what their relic was, you know.
Yeah.
Whether it was a legitimate relic or not, I don't know, it had been regarded as such for thousands of years, and it was interesting to look at. Like we went to a church one time that supposedly had the crown of thorns. We went to one that supposedly had the nails. You know, there's a church in Germany that supposedly has a drop of Christ's blood. You know, whether you believe it or not, they've regarded it as such for a long period of
well,
time.
France, you know, the burning of the church there and all, that's what they said, they had nails and,
Yeah.
was that the same one?
Crown of thorns.
They
Yeah.
all-
Yeah, at Notre Dame.
But if what you were saying, the staff, that was the same staff, people would worship the staff instead of God,
Right.
you know?
Well, they
Well-
would know, you know, but whoever Elijah or Elijah would, you know, they would have.
But you know, that's what they kind of did with the Ark of the Covenant. They kind of worshiped it.
They did, they sure did. And even at this point in time, the serpent that Moses had constructed in the wilderness that he raised up, that was still in existence, because we're going to read later on about how it was destroyed. But the thing about relics, I remember one time reading, I think probably during around the time of Martin Luther, somebody went around and made a survey of how many fragments of the true cross were held as relics in various churches, and he determined there's enough to build several fleets of ships.
Yeah.
That probably tells us a lot about that.
Well, I can remember when I was probably 45, and the kids thought, you know, the ones we were bringing to church with ours and all, one of them, you know, at 45, you think you're young, and I guess this little girl, some statement or something, she was, you know, with Brookie Lynn, you know, she was with them, and I think she thought I was a relic at 45.
Yeah.
They do.
Yeah, we are. Fossil laws. All right. 2 Kings chapter 4, we're going to pick up in verse 8. This is the account of the Shunammite woman, and this is something we've read before. We've all read it several times, and I heard something that was a profound thought about some pastor was admonishing his congregation to continue to read stories in the Old Testament. One young man says, I read it, he says, you know, every time I read those stories, he says, they're always the same, they never change. And the pastor said, yeah, that's right, they're not supposed to change, you're supposed to change. Every time you read one of these stories, it's going to change you. And it really will, Such that the next time you read it, you're going to see something else there, or you're going to see something in there that your eyes are opened, or it tells you something about how you should lead your life. So, the Shunammite woman, a very profound story, very much full of foreshadowings of Christ. So let's see if we can pick those out as we read. Lon, would you read for us 2 Kings chapter 4, starting in verse 9?
One day Elijah went to Shunem, and a well-to-do woman was there who urged him to stay for a meal. So whenever he came by, he stopped there to eat. She said to her husband, I know that this man who often comes our way is a holy man of God. Let's make a small room on the roof and put in it a bed, a table, a chair, and a lamp for him. Then he can stay whenever he comes to us.
All right, pause right there. All right, this is a very interesting account. The Shunammite woman, she's a very interesting study. She is a great woman of faith. It says, my translation says, she passed over, that Elisha went to Shunem, where there was a prominent woman. Who's got another description?
Well-to-do.
Well-to-do.
Well-to-do, yeah. She was a prominent woman. So, I think the King James Version says something like she was a great woman. But anyway, she was a wise woman. And it says of her that she tells her husband, I perceive or I sense that this is a holy man who is passing by us. And so what we see here is that she has received a revelation, I believe a revelation from God, that God is at work in the life of Elisha, and she becomes aware of it, perhaps like nobody else around her. And what does she do as a result of it?
Welcomes him, opens up her home to him.
Yeah, she said,
Kind of like what Jesus said to the 12 apostles when he said,
yeah,
those who, when you go, those that welcome me and stay there.
yeah. And so what she does is she takes an upper room in her house and she has it remodeled so he can live there. So in other words, she adjusts her life to make Elisha a part of it. Now those of you who are studying Experiencing God, how does this relate to that?
Yeah, you gotta adjust for relationships or circumstances or whatever.
Well, she evidently heard that God was at work in him, and so she joined in.
She not just heard, she
She
perceived, it was revealed.
Right, that's, yeah, and
So
so
when you
she,
hear
She acted accordingly. Yeah.
right,
Yeah,
One of the first principle we learned in this study of experiencing God is what?
he's always at work.
God is always at work around us.
Right.
And one of the things we're supposed to do is look around and perceive. Pray that God would open our eyes so that we can see, open our ears so that we can hear. And as soon as we perceive, like she did, that God is at work around us, what are we supposed to do? Join in, because why? That's the call. That's the call of the Spirit for us to join in God's work. And that's exactly what this Shunammite woman did right here. She perceived, I think she had a revelation. The Spirit opened her eyes, opened her ears. She heard, she saw, she perceived that this was a man of God. So what did she do? She said, I need to get next to this guy.
She was a Gentile?
I don't know if she's a Gentile. Shunem, let's see if it's on this map. I think Shunem is not, I located it on one of my maps, maybe you have it on yours, but I think it's right here in the Kishon River Valley, which is kind of east of Mount Carmel, because she goes running back and forth there. If you have it on your map, I think it's somewhere around here. So I think she's probably of the northern kingdom. She's probably a Jew.
So she would have scriptures or,
Yeah.
you know.
She would have known of the existence of God, but I think what we see here is that she had a revelation of God in a way that she never had before, because she saw like perhaps others had not seen, that God was very powerfully at work in the life of Elisha. All right, read on, Lon.
One day when Elisha came, he went up to his room and lay down there. He said to his servant Gisha, call the Shunammite. So he called her, and she stood before him. Elijah said to him, tell her you have gone to all this trouble for us. Now what can be done for you? Can we speak on your behalf to the king or to the commander of the army? She replied, I have a home among my own people.
Pause right there. That's a kind of interesting exchange. He says, what can I do for you? Would you be spoken of? In other words, Elisha saying, do you want me to go to the king or the captain of the army and speak on your behalf? And what does she say?
She has a home among her own people.
Yeah. She says, no. Yeah. She says, I'm really not looking for any greatness. I'm satisfied. She recognizes that that's where she's supposed to be, right there. She's not to go anywhere else except be right there. You know, which is sort of like when we see God working among us, close by us, we're supposed to move closer to that. We don't have to pack up and go somewhere else or seek some other high office or some higher position. Just stay right there. And so,
Would that indicate she would be trying to bring those around her to know?
probably, yeah, she was probably feeling a sense of, whatever she had, she was going to share with those around her. That's a good point.
She didn't need a pat on the back.
Exactly. We're going to read about some folks later on that really very much wanted pats on the back, aren't we? Okay, read on.
What can be done for her? Elisha asked. Gehazi said, she has no son, and her husband is old. Then Elisha said, call her. So he called her, and she stood in the doorway. About this time next year, Elisha said, you will hold a son in your arms. No, my lord, she objected. Please, man of God, don't mislead your servant. But the woman became pregnant, and the next year, about that same time, she gave birth to a son, just as Elisha had told her.
Pause right there. All right, so what do we see in that? So far, what do we see that is a foreshadowing of Christ? What about the birth of the son? And what was the condition? What was her condition?
She was barren.
She was
Well,
barren.
Yeah.
Not a virgin birth, but it's just like when Sarah bore Isaac. All right, Sarah was very old. Abraham was even older, so that was a foreshadowing of a virgin birth.
Wasn't Samuel's mother the same way?
Yes, that's who I thought of, was
That-
Hannah.
Yeah.
Say that's
It- When it
Because-
talks about her, it doesn't say she's old, it
That's
just
right.
says old guy.
Right, I thought she was a young woman.
Yeah, but in either event, she knew that she could not bear a son except through some miraculous intervention. That's the important thing. Whether her husband was old, whether she was old and barren, whatever it was, the point is it was impossible for her to bear a son naturally, just like it was impossible in the world's eyes for Abraham and Sarah to have a son, but they did. Again, a foreshadowing of the miraculous coming of Christ. And I think we see
It
the same thing
also
here.
would state that she was true to her husband,
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Because with the other ones, they ended up trying to,
yeah,
circumvent, yeah.
yeah.
But it's also important that God sent someone and told her.
Uh-huh.
So there was no saying any other thing about it.
Right.
Someone told, the angel told Mary.
Uh-huh.
Elijah told her.
Yeah. Her reaction is a little bit different. What is her reaction when Elisha,
She thinks he's teasing her, almost said, don't mislead me.
yeah, don't miss, it's as if,
Get my
Don't
hopes
give
up.
me a
Don't
false
give me hopes,
promise.
yeah. Don't give me false
Hopes,
hopes.
get
Yes.
hopes,
as if to say that was the very thing she wanted the
Oh,
most.
that's
Yes.
That she was, her heart was yearning for a son. She really wanted it. And Elisha says, basically, I'm gonna give you what you want. And she says, don't mislead me, because that's really what I want. That's where my heart is
Yes,
set.
God revealed to Elisha what she really wanted.
I think that's right. I think that's right. And-
At this time, did they have many wives? It's not sad.
But
Yeah,
I don't-
I mean, that polygamy was not uncommon at that time. I don't think we have that situation here, I think.
But she was concerned about what the servant would think too.
Yeah.
So she was truly trying to follow the Lord and listen to the Lord.
Mhm.
And she didn't want anyone to think that, this could happen
Right.
other than.
Right.
the other couple that I thought about with her and her husband was Elizabeth and Zechariah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And there are a lot of circumstances like that. Yeah,
Well,
That's-
Judas.
the same way.
I'm just saying she's very gracious, because if I'd been told that, I would say, am I gonna have help?
Yep. Okay, verse 18. Who wants to read next? Tommy, you want to read or pass?
Pass.
Troy, you want to read?
18,
18, yes, sir.
and the child grew, now it happened that he went out to his father, to the reapers. And he said to his father, my head, my head. So he said to his servant, carry him to his mother. When he had taken him and brought him to his mother, he sat on her knee until noon, and then he died. And she went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God, shut the door upon him, and went out. Then she called to her husband and said, please send me one of the young men and one of the donkeys, that I may run to the man of God and come back. So he said, why are you going to him today? It is neither the new moon nor the Sabbath.
What's
And
in
she
that?
said, it is well.
All right, that's a good question. Lon says, why in the world did the husband say that? The wife says, get me something to ride on, give me some servants, because I'm going to see the man of God. And the husband says, what? Why will you go to him today? It's neither new moon or Sabbath.
Well, typically it was a custom to consult the prophets on holy days.
It was, that's right.
It would have been, but
Yeah.
Following the law.
It would be the same. Well, here's the thing. So she didn't tell her husband that the son was dead. You see? And so she's going to church. It's like, it's Tuesday, I'm going to church. And so why are you going to church on Tuesday? That's kind of what the question was about. Why are you going to see the man of God? It's not a time of celebration, it's not a church day.
And by not telling him, she evidently still had hope he could be alive.
She did because,
That he could save her.
exactly right, because, what does she say? At the end of verse 23. She says, everything's okay. What faith? Her son had died.
It's all right.
Yeah.
She says everything is okay.
Hmm.
And so she's going, so she has great faith at that point.
But she placed him in the Elisha's chamber.
Yeah,
Mhm.
she
Was
did.
that, what's the symbolism of that? Was it to retain his soul or a reproach to Elisha?
Well, I want you to think about it in the context of everything that's going on here, because it kind of all fits together. And one of the things that is part of it, in verse 18 says, when the child was grown, the day came when he went out to his father and the reapers.
The Grim Reaper?
Harvesters, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is kind of all about that. So let's read
And is
on.
this bedroom the tomb?
Sorry.
The presence of God.
Sort of.
Yeah.
Okay, read verse 25. Joanne, you want to read? Wait, where are we? Verse 24?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Is that you, Warren?
yeah.
No, it's Joanne.
Joanne, you read your passage? Okay.
Sarah, Nick?
She saddled the donkey and said to her servant, lead on, don't slow down for me unless I tell you. So, where did that go?
So she set out and came to the man of God at Mount Carmel. When he saw her in the distance, the man of God said to his servant Gehazi, look, there is the Shunammite.
Pause right there. Now that's a profound thing, because they were seeing, if Elisha is up on Mount Carmel, it's a big old mountain. Jackie and I've been there. You look down, you can see this beautiful valley below. She probably saw this chariot come along, and I mean, way off in the distance. And she says, "That's the Shunammite woman." That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
How he would know that. I think he perceived that this woman was coming to him. Now I don't think he saw her as much as he just perceived her presence, because God was working in both of them. Read on.
Run to meet her and ask her, are you all right? Is your husband all right? Is your child all right? Everything is all right, she said.
Pause right there. So when asked again, how's everything going? She says, everything's just fine. Everything's okay. But it wasn't, of course, really. But she's telling herself that, in her spirit, her frame of mind is, yes, ultimately I know that everything is going to be okay.
And that's total faith.
It is. That's exactly right. And that really tells us how our faith should be, right? That even in the most tragic of circumstances, what this Shunammite woman wanted most in her heart was to have a son. She's promised a son. Her heart leaps, and she says, now don't fool me, all right? You gave me a son, and so she was overjoyed. And then the son dies, all right? But even so, she doesn't lose hope, because what she's saying, she said, it's well with my soul. Everything is okay.
But she's also saying, I'm not saying anything about his death to anyone except the man of God.
Yeah.
I'm looking only to him for the help. He's the one who gave me this child,
Yeah.
and he's the one who can raise him back
That's
or
right.
heal him.
And as soon as the stressful situation came up, what does she do? She gets on her mountain and she says, drive and go forward and don't slow down unless I tell you. So she's made a beeline for the man of God.
I can't help but this verse, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And I was thinking that's what was going through her mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
Had to.
Read on. 27.
When she reached the man of God at the mountain, she took hold of his feet. Gehazi,
Gazi.
came over to push her away, but the man of God said, leave her alone. She is in bitter distress, but the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me why. Did I ask you for a son, my Lord? She said. Didn't I tell you, don't raise my hopes?
So that's all that she says. She basically kind of repeats the little encounter when Elisha told her that this time next year you're going to have a son. She says, don't be messing with me. Don't tell me something that's not true, because that's what I really, really want. And so when she runs back to him, what does she say? She said, I didn't ask you for a son, did I? So don't deceive me in all this. You gave me this son, And I assume that you had a reason for it, so I want to know what's going on, because this is, she's basically saying, things are not going according with my plan. This is not what I wanted. All right, so read on.
Elisha said to Gehazi, tuck your cloak into your belt, take my staff in your hand and run. If you meet anyone, do not greet him. And if anyone greets you, do not answer. Lay my staff on the boy's face.
That's interesting. And that's something that puzzled me as I read this for about the first 10 times. So Elisha says, or Elisha receives the entreaty from the Shunammite woman. All right, so he knows that the boy has died. So he sends Gehazi the servant, and he tells Gehazi to do what? To take his staff and lay it on the boy's face. And Gehazi does that. And what happens when he does? Nothing happens. You think, that's strange. What is that all about? Read on.
But I think the important part is if you meet anyone, do not greet him, and if anyone greets you, do not answer, because you're running with purpose.
Yeah.
And you're not stopping for anything,
Mm-hmm.
Not
no
hello,
distractions, nothing.
Also,
It's to stop you.
maybe Satan get in the way.
Yes.
Good point.
Yeah.
I want us to think about what the significance of that is, laying the staff on the boy's face. All right. Read on.
But the child's mother said, as surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you. So he got up and followed her.
Pause right there just a second. She said two profound things just recently. The first thing that she says that is profound is when she encounters Elisha and he asks how things go, and she says what? Everything's fine. It is well. It is well with my soul. And then what does she say to him? She says, I will not leave you. So she knows the source of her help. And she says, the first thing she does is she grabs him by the legs. Gehazi's going to tackle her to keep her away, and Elisha says no.
So are they not really allowed to touch the prophets, you think? They were respected that way, I guess?
Probably, and Elisha too, he more or less kept his distance from people, we know that, and as Elijah did too to a point, but she got him. She was focused. She had a mission, okay, and she says, I will not leave you. And so what happened? So he arose and followed her, and they went back home. Read on.
Gehazi went on ahead and laid the staff on the boy's face, but there was no sound or response. So Gehazi went back to Elisha and told him, the boy has not awakened. When Elijah reached the house, there was the boy lying dead on his couch. He went in, shut the door on the two of them, and prayed to the Lord. Then he got on the bed and lay upon the boy, mouth to mouth, eyes to eyes, hands to hands, as he stretched himself out and upon him. The boy's body grew warm. Elijah turned away and walked back and forth in the room, and then got on the bed and stretched out upon him once more. The boy sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes. Elisha summoned Gehazi and said, call the Shunammite. And he did. When she came, he said, take your son. She came in and fell at his feet and bowed to the ground. Then she took her son and went out.
This is a very, very strange story. One of the things, you look at verse 35, let me just read this over again. So, the servant Gehazi goes in, he lays the staff on the boy's face, doesn't do anything. All right, reports back saying, Elisha came into the house, the lad was dead, he was on the bed. So he entered, he shut the door behind him, he prayed to the Lord, then he went in and lay on the child, put his mouth on the child's mouth, his eyes on the child's eyes, his hands on the child's hands, and stretched him out. Okay. Verse 35, different translations, but I think the most accurate translation says, verse 35, then he returned and walked in the house back and forth. Okay. And I think the point that it says Elisha returned is significant to this story. He returned and went back and forth. He stretched himself on him, and the lad sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes. And the boy was alive. gave back to his mother. So what is the story about? And particularly, what is that strange account of laying the staff on the boy's face and it didn't do anything? Or it seemed to everyone else that it didn't do anything. So what is this about?
Well,
Certainly about resurrection, isn't it?
Yes, but if you look at 32 through 35, that is the same way that Elijah raised the child at Zarephath. He stretched out on him in the same manner. And Elisha was not with Elijah at that time, so he may not have known how he did that, but that's what the Lord told him to do. It's interesting that they were both raised the same way. And it's like they were given a mouth-to-mouth resuscitation is what they were doing. But the laying on of the staff, like I'm thinking down his body, the crook being on his face and then the rest of it being down his body. But the staff is not what gives life. Only God gives life. And Elisha and Elijah, in both instances, were the man of God, and God would hear their prayers for the resurrection.
Yeah, I was thinking
And
similar to
gave
that.
them the power.
You know, we
to
can
do
only
that.
be saved through Christ. But then I was thinking, but Christ gave the apostles ability to do miracles, but remember that one time they couldn't cast out that spirit because of their faith.
Right,
And maybe,
but they
His
never
servant
raised
just did it.
anyone to life
not that I know
either.
of either. Yeah.
And didn't God in Genesis, he took the dust and he breathed life?
Breathed into the life.
Each one of these accounts of the resurrection, in fact, when Wanda and I were talking the other day, I went back and I found, other than the resurrection of Christ, I found 8 accounts of resurrection. The first one was Elijah. This is the second one with Elisha. The third one relates to what we were talking about the body was thrown in with Elisha's bones, raised from the dead. And then Christ resurrected 3 people. The young man, the widow's son in the city of Nain, Jairus' daughter, and then of course Lazarus. And then in the book of Acts, Tabitha was raised. And then at Tralles, there was, I think, a young man was raised from the dead. So there are 8 accounts. Each one of these accounts of resurrection is supposed to teach us about resurrection. The Old Testament accounts of resurrection are foreshadowings, obviously, of the resurrection of Christ. We learn something more in this resurrection account in Elisha than we did with Elijah. In the account of Elijah, the people are told, yes, the answer to the question that Job asked, and that the other prophets asked, if a person dies, will he ever live again? And the answer proven by Elijah's life is yes, the dead can come back to life. But we have something different, and additional information is given to us about resurrection in this life of, in this account with Elisha. And I think it is a broader picture, because it's introduced to say that the boy died when he went out to meet with his father and the reapers. And so I think this relates to the time of everyone's death, when you go to meet your father and the so-called grim reaper. And so it came time for the boy to die. He died, okay? The mother, as she was not supposed to, did not lose hope. She remained hope. Why? She remained hopeful. Why? Because she knew that God was acting through Elisha, and Elisha had made her a promise of a son, and it was fulfilled. And again, the coming of her son is like the promise of the Messiah. And so we have that coming. But I think the business of the laying of the staff on the boy's face is similar to what we all experience when we lose a loved one. When that person dies, you know, father, mother, spouse, child, whatever. We lose a child. We lose someone that we love. That person is dead for present purposes, and the laying on of the staff is like the burial. But that death is not the end. There's something else coming. And the resurrection comes when? The resurrection comes after Elisha, the man of God, comes and essentially gives, puts his mouth on the other person's mouth, gives him a new mouth, gives him new eyes, gives the person new hands. And I think it's interesting here that it says, the mother came to know of that the son came back to life when he returned and walked in the house back and forth. When he returned, meaning
That's
what?
when Jesus comes back.
That's right. That's when we will all be resurrected. I think that's what this story is about. It is a foreshadowing of, yes, we're all going to die. We're all going to have the staff laid on our face, but that is not the end, because when he returns to walk around, the second coming of Christ, that's when we're all going to be raised up. And we're going to be raised up in a way that we have a new mouth, and we have new eyes, and we have new hands, and we have new life because of what Christ has done for us.
I would be curious to know, in all those cases of resurrection, how long those people were dead. Like for this, was he dead 3 days?
I don't know. We don't have an account exactly how long it was. We know how long Lazarus was in the tomb. He was there for 4 days, because what does his sister say? Don't dig him up now because he's going to stink. He's been there for a long time. But what made those, and that's a good point, Nancy, I don't know the answer to that. What made those resurrection accounts different from the resurrection of Christ? Why was Christ's resurrection different? Because Christ was raised never to die again. All these other people, they came back to life, but as far as we know, they died. They didn't live forever, okay? But the resurrection of Christ, he came back, he was raised by the power of God, and he lived forever. He never died after that. That's how they're different. But what do you make of this? This is something I still don't know the answer to completely. Is it says, when the lad woke up, he sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes. I don't recall, I searched my Bible, I couldn't find another account of a sneeze recorded in the Old Testament.
The only thing I was thinking about that completion is 7, right? I mean, we
Yeah,
can't
seven means something, yeah.
perfection or something, so
There's got to be some significance.
A number of earthly perfection.
yeah, like it's completed. I'm alive.
It's complete, yeah. And what would the sneezing have to do with anything? What's the purpose of a sneeze?
I guess
To
it needs to
clear
start your heart going.
Was that?
Doesn't it clear out?
Yeah,
Like
the
some
purpose
of
of
the
sneeze is to
impurities?
expel something harmful to you, right? I mean, something floats in and gets in your sinuses. The idea of the sneeze, I think, is to expel that. Why? Because if you get an infection up in your sinuses, it could be serious, and it's close to your brain, it could kill you. And so the sneeze is something that God has given to us to protect us. But the boy sneezed 7 times. I thought about that account of, in fact, it's in Matthew 12:45. Let me run over and look at that. It doesn't have to do with sneezing, but it does have to do a little bit with it. Maybe. Matthew 12:45. And you're familiar with this account. And this is Jesus talking about the people and
There it goes.
their desire for signs.
I got it.
You got it? Read verse 1?
Yeah.
Read verse 40. We're starting in 43 through 45.
When an evil spirit comes out of a man, it goes through arid places seeking rest and does not find it. Then it says, I will return to the house I left. When it arrives, it finds the house unoccupied, swept clean, and put in order. Then it goes and takes with it 7 other spirits more wicked than itself. And then they go in and they live there. And the final condition of that man is worse than the first. That is how it will be with this wicked generation.
So I don't know if that has anything to do with it. It has to do with seven evil spirits coming into a person at a particular time. It could be when he dies. And so the sneezing could be the expulsion, spiritual expulsion of these evil spirits that occurs. I don't know. If anybody gets a revelation and you come to an understanding of what that sneezing has to do with anything, or you can find any other references in the scriptures to sneezing, please let us all know.
So he's cleaning house when he sneezes?
Cleaning house, yeah. It's also thought there was, people sneeze. When somebody sneezes, what do you say?
Bless you.
Bless you. You know where that comes from? It was thought during the Middle Ages that when you sneezed, that you came closer to death than you ever would in your life. And so when people would sneeze, then people would say, God bless you. Why? Because they thought that the demons were going to possess the person, and the God bless you was to protect them against the evil spirits that were coming in at the time they sneezed and they were close to death. Yeah. So, strange customs we people keep, huh? All right, we got a little more time. Do we have time, Brett? A little more time? Poisonous too?
Yeah.
All right, Terry, read for us if you would, verse 38.
Elisha returned to Gilgal, and there was a famine in that region. While the company of the prophets was meeting with him, he said to his servant, "Put on the large pot and cook some stew for these men." One of them went out to the fields to gather herbs and found a wild vine. He gathered some of its gourd and filled the fold of his cloak. When he returned, he cut them up into the pot of stew. Though no one knew what they were, the stew was poured out for the men. But as they began to eat it, they cried out, "O man of God, there is death in the pot," and they could not eat it. Elisha said, "Get some flour." He put it into the pot and said, "Serve it to the people to eat." And there was nothing harmful in the pot.
What is that all about?
I think it's hot peppers.
Could very well be.
And they are,
I think you made a,
that's right,
Some of
calm it
those
down.
high-powered habaneros in there.
everything's good in the roof.
Yeah.
We've all been into that depth of the pot. What is the wild vine and wild gourds that's put into the pot? What is that symbolic of? See, I think that this relates to false teaching.
False teaching?
I think what there's a famine in the land, and a lot of times when a famine is referred to, that is the famine of the hearing of the word of God. Okay, and so this is a gathering of the sons of the prophets. All these prophets are around, and they're kind of putting their input into the big pot of stew. And so some guy goes out and he picks up some wild gourds, some wild vines, which I think is false teaching. He takes his false teaching and throws it into the pot, and it poisons the whole batch of stew. And they recognize that there's death in the pot, because anytime you have false teaching, you try to mix the false teaching with the true teaching, there's going to be some death results. And so Elisha says, in my translation, I think in the King James it says, "Now bring me meal," and throw meal into the pot. And after he threw the meal into the pot, then everything was okay, and they could eat of it. What does that meal represent?
I guess the word of God, huh? Because meal sticks things together, I mean, it's what holds it together.
Well, yeah, mine says flour, which is kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm
I
guessing
think
that,
you
you know,
need-
put the truth of the word of God in here, with
Yeah.
the false teaching.
Yeah, to me, if we think of this in the context of a foreshadowing of Christ, at the time that Christ came, there was a lot of false teaching in the land, wasn't there?
Right.
And so what Christ brought to them, and I think the use of the word meal there was interesting, because the thing that I thought of was one of the things that Christ brought them was the Passover meal, the Last Supper. Okay, and I think that perhaps this is a foreshadowing of what Christ did at the Last Supper, where he said, irrespective of all these other teachings out there, he said, "This is my body, take and eat. This is my blood, drink." Meaning what? That in what I've done with my body, the Last Supper, the meal representing my life, in my life I have fulfilled all the requirements of the law for you, and in my death I will deal with the consequences of sin. Because the real question that has plagued these people and mankind all throughout history is, number one, what can I do to earn the blessings? And number two, what can I do to avoid the curses? And Jesus did both, didn't he? And so that is the meal that really, that cleanses the pot and makes everything all right. You may have false teaching all around, but if you understand those two things, then everything is going to be okay.
And don't eat anything you don't know what it is.
Yeah, that's right. Watch out for those.
As my husband can attest to.
Yeah, that's tough for Louisiana people. All right, 42. Nancy, you want to read that for us? We just a couple more seconds and then it's timeout. 42 to 44.
A man came from Baal Shalisha, bringing food from the first fruits to the man of God, 20 loaves of barley and fresh ears of grain in his sack. Elisha said, "Give it to the people and let them eat." But his servant said, "How can I set this before 100 people?" So he repeated, "Give it to the people and let them eat. For thus says the Lord, they shall eat and have some left." He set it before them. They ate and had some left according to the word of the Lord.
That's a foreshadowing to what?
Christ and 5,000.
Yeah, feeding 5,000 one time, and then fed 4,000 another time. And these loaves, at this point in time, they had 20 loaves of barley, but these weren't big old bread loaves. These were probably smaller than a man's fist. So one of these loaves would certainly not have been enough. 20 of these things wasn't enough to feed 100 men. But it's interesting here that that's one of the things that Christ does when he comes back. He feeds the people in the same way that Elisha did, meaning what? He is fulfilling all the prophecies. This is a prophecy about Christ. Remember, Christ said, I didn't come to destroy the law or the prophets, but to fulfill. Christ fulfilled all the requirements of the law. He also fulfilled all the prophecies. And so when they see in the life of Christ that he fed the 5,000, they say, oh, that's exactly what Elisha did way back when. This is the guy. Jesus said, one of the things he said, I'm the door. I came in the right way. Meaning what? When I came to you, I came to fulfill the history. I'm doing everything that the Old Testament said the Messiah would do. Others don't do that. I'm the true door. I'm the way.
This is as an offering because it's from the first grain.
Was that?
This is like an offering
Yeah.
because it's from the first grains. It's not the seconds or leftovers or.
And it was offered to the Lord.
Yep.
Yep. Exactly. Okay. We're going to pause right there.